Welcome to Excel Made Easy. Today, we are going to begin our journey with data analysis using Microsoft Excel. So those of you who have made up your mind to start analyzing data or to be on the path of data analysis, it's a very good choice. Don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe, don't forget to put me on post notifications so that once I drop videos concerning data analysis, you'll be the first to see it. Now, we are going to first begin with our first module. So in our slide, the first thing we are going to talk about is data sources and access. Without data, there's no analysis. So this will be our first model, data sources and access. Sits down and we'll explain everything in detail. In Excel, everything is what's possible. Okay, so now let's look at this slide. Now you can see without data, analysis is impossible, which is very true. All the things that we want to analyze, we need data. Without data, ChatGPT cannot work. So it should tell you how valuable data is. In our current world, data is like oil. Data brings money. So you should be so intentional and so serious about data. So anytime you want to venture into data analysis, you should know that the engine is the data, because without data, analysis is impossible. Now let's start with the first thing. What is data? Now data refers to raw facts, figures, observations, or measurements that are collected about people, objects, events, or even activities. So anytime you hear about data has to do with pieces of information. It doesn't tell the story yet. Raw data. That's why they'll tell you it's raw facts. It doesn't tell the story yet. It's just pieces of information that you must add together to tell the whole story. That's the idea of data analysis. Waiting to combine all these pieces of information to gather or to tell a story. Now let's say, for instance, a university uploads its graduation list. Once the graduation list drops, you will see the names of the students, you will see the class of the students, you can also see the GPA of the students. These are raw data. The names are data, the classes are data, the GPA are just raw data. It doesn't talk about any information yet. A normal person or a JHS or SHS person might not understand what the data means, what CGPA means, whether the higher the number, the best students, or whatever the case is. So once the university uploads their graduation list, whatever is being uploaded is just raw data. The names of the students, the class of the student, the GPA of the students, these are just raw data. But once we combine these things together, it can tell a whole story about the data. Now the second one, let's move to the data collection. What is data collection? Data collection is the process of gathering the raw facts. So as I said earlier, the data are just pieces of information. Now the data collection is the process of collecting these pieces of information, figures, or information from relevant sources. So the process that you employ to gather this information is very, very important. So let's imagine that the university wants to, let's say, upload the data. How are they going to gather the data? One, the academic registry has to look at, let's say, the finance department has to gather information from different departments. So for instance, the academic registry has to gather information from the finance department and see whether there are some people who are owing school fees or not. If you are owing, your information will not be uploaded. So you see, it's a process of gathering information. They have to look at the different departments and take the records of all the students based on their courses and everything. So these are the processes that the university will employ to collect what? To collect data. Or let's even take, for instance, when you go to, let's say, an organization, they have process of taking data. One process can be the attendance record. It's also a process of data collection. Security cameras. It's also a data of what? It's also data collection. So anytime you hear about data collection, the process that you employ to gather these pieces of information together from relevant sources, the keyword, relevant sources, not just any other sources. Then the third thing is the data analysis itself. So when we talk about data analysis, it's the process of examining and interpreting collected data to draw meaningful conclusions and support decision making. So if the university uploads the data, now how do we analyze the data? Careful analysis, interpreting the data. So based on the data, we can tell that, let's say it's only 7 people that had first class out of 1,000 students. That analysis alone can give us, make us, let's say, that analysis alone can support our decision making. That why is it that only 7 students were able to get first class in this course? Also, one of the analysis that you can make is that maybe out of the 7 students, they were all girls that had the first class. So what's happening to the boys? You see, we have the data. We are now interpreting the data. So anytime we talk about data analysis, we are trying to draw meaningful insights from the data so you can make a decision. So now that we know that a lot of girls are rather getting a first class, what are we going to do to help the boys to also achieve this height? So that is the idea of data collection and data analysis. So now let's move to the next slide. So business value depends on effective data analysis. You know, every business has competitors. And what will actually make your business attract more customers is when your business is giving out value. The word value. That's what attracts and retains customers. And if you want your business to retain or attract customers, you shouldn't joke with data analysis because it's a data analysis that will give you the business value. So take note of that. Every business value depends on effective data analysis. Now, when you realize that companies don't spend money on data just for spending sake. They do it because they know that a well-analyzed data set help them make decisions that save money, increase revenue, or improve operations. Now look at the first one. When reliable data is collected, you see, you have to be intentional about collecting data. That's where the word reliable comes in. Because if you go and collect bad, incompleted, or corrupt data at the start, everything will go down the drain. It's like garbage in, garbage out. So you should be very, very, very intentional and calculated when you are getting your information. Make sure that the information are reliable, the sources are true, there's some kind of integrity in your source of data, because remember that if the data is corrupted, the analysis is also corrupted. So the most important thing is the data. So make sure that you don't joke with data collection and make sure that the source of data is reliable and can be collected effectively. Now, when you collect the data is then managed and stored. You have to store and manage the data. Because when you collect the data, it doesn't go into thin air. You have to store and manage the data. So to store and manage the data, you might need a cloud server, or you might need a relational database, or even an organized Excel sheet. Yeah. This step ensures that the data is clean, secure, structured, and easy to retrieve when needed. So once you collect the reliable data, The question is, how do you manage and store the data? That's where data cleaning comes inside. You gather the raw data, you clean it, and you store it, and make sure that there are rules and regulations surrounding what's the data. Because take note that data is very expensive, and data collection is currently the oil in the industry. So data should be managed and stored very, very, very well. So after you are done managing and storing the data, now then where the magic happens, that's the data analysis. Now the data analysis is used to solve business problems. So this is where the magic actually happens. So storing of data doesn't make money. No. What makes money is the insights, the patterns, you turning the raw numbers into actual solutions for organizational problems. That is the main goal of the data. The data is not there for their sake, or you don't manage and store the data and just put it there. No, you are just wasting your money. The key thing is to analyze the data very well. Make sure you look at patterns. Make sure you turn raw numbers into actual solutions. Make sure you look for insights to solve a specific problem. That's the purpose of the data. So, in summary, as a business analyst, the first thing is to collect reliable data. Make sure the data is true. Make sure it's very factual. Make sure it's not corrupt. Once you are done collecting the data, then you have to manage and store the data. You have to clean the data. We'll talk about cleaning data very soon. You have to clean the data. You have to arrange the data very well. Once you are done, then you store it in a safe place. As the data is very, very valuable. So it can be in your cloud service, encrypted with password. It can be in your relational databases. It can also be in your Excel templates. Excel also has a password that you can put on the template just to store the data, because data is very valuable. If somebody makes a slight change in your data, it will depict wrong information. So once you're done storing the data, then you go and retrieve the data and analyze the data very well. Look for insights, look for patterns, turn the raw numbers into solutions. Once you do that, that's where you'll be able to create business value. So in order to create business value, these are the three main important steps to create business value. Reliable data is collected, data is managed and stored, then the magic happens, data analysis. So we realize that's why data analysts are very, 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 very important in today's data, because everything in this world relies on data. The emergence of artificial intelligence relies on data. Without data, AI can't do anything. So the next one, we move to the next slide. So at this slide, as a data analyst, you should know where your data comes from. So those of you who are aspiring to be analysts, you should know where to look for. So when a company calls you to come and analyze the data, you should know where to look for. If you are seeking for certain kinds of information, you should know where to look for. So what are some of the readily available data? The first one is the company data. So the company data is the data that stores or that collects and stores. It's the data that a company collects and stores in a storage location with limited access. So these are private proprietary data for the company. It's not limited. It's not, available to the public. There are limited access. It belongs exclusively to the company. So, and it's very, very sensitive. That's why it's not shown to the public like that. So an example is the customer data. So if you are dealing with customers, your names of the customers, their phone numbers, their email addresses, their subscription types. Let's take DSTV for instance. DSTV's customer data, the names of their customers, their phone numbers, email addresses, and subscription types. Such kind of information is very sensitive. And there will be only limited access to such kind of information. So this is an example of a company data. And the second one has to do with the sales data. So the sales data can be talking about the transaction histories, the quantities sold, the store locations, and daily revenue. So sales data has to do with, let's use the DSTV company for instance. The sales they make each and every day, subscriptions, the type of subscriptions, the money they get All this kind of information are very, very sensitive. So such information is exclusive to the company and it's not going to be shown in public. Once they make that information available in company, the company is dead. Because as I said, their data is very, very, very powerful. Then the last one has to do with the financial data. So profit margins, operational expenses, tax reports, and company's budgets. These are all sources of data, but they are limited to a company or what? A business. So these are some of the company's data, customer data, sales data, and the financial data. Then we move to the online and public data. So as a data analyst also, you can also get your reliable data from these sources, public records by government and non-government organization. So this is like an open source data. Anyone can access it online. It's usually for free and it's add a broader context to their internal company data. So if you, as a company, if you want an additional data for your company, you can dive into the government companies. So let's say, for instance, you're a company whereby you produce girls' things. And you realize, okay, let me talk about the census data. So examples of public data is one, the census data, population, demographics, age distributions, regional group tracking. All this information can be provided by the government. In Ghana, it's provided by the statistical services. If you want information on population, it's provided by the Ghana Statistical Services. So as a company, let's say you are a company that you are dealing in the selling of female items. And when the population census came, you realize that the populations of female are more than that of male. As a company, you should know that you'll be making more profits for such data. You get it? So these are all sources of public data. Then we can also have the weather data. So weather data, whereby you have historical climate patterns and daily updates. And this kind of information is crucial for logistics companies and businesses, farmers especially. Once they have the weather data, they can tell that, oh, this very month is going to rain heavily, so they can prepare their plants for harvest. Or they know that this very month there's going to be a very dry season. And maybe they will start tilling their grounds. So they can get such information from the weather data. Then the medical data also. You can get health statistics, diseases trend, global health metrics published by organizations like the World Health Organizations. So in Ghana, for instance, we can know the percentage of people who have HIV/AIDS. We can know the percentage of people who have kidney diseases. With this kind of reliable data, pharmacies, hospitals can analyze this data and make an informed decision. Maybe they realize that 40% of the population of the youth have HIV/AIDS. With such information, they can go around and start educating people on the disadvantages or the effects of sexually transmitted diseases, make public educations so that it will prevent people from having sex without using the right protection. So this kind of data can also help companies. It can also help those selling the contraceptives, all this kind of information. They need the medical data. So that is the idea for this slide. All right, so let's move to the next slide. Okay, so the previous slide, we talked about where the data lives. Now this slide explains the process of how you obtain it. You can either go out and get it yourself or use what others have already gathered. Now you can see the first type is you collect your own data. That's the first hand data. So the first hand data is data you collect by yourself directly from the source for a specific purpose. Now, this key concept is often called primary data. It is highly specific to your problem because you design the collection process yourself. You own this data and it is always fresh. So an examples of this kind of data is interviews, talking one-on-one with people to get deep, detailed insights. And the second one is also service, sending out questionnaires to a large group to get broad feedback. And we also have experiments whereby we are testing a theory, like testing different website designs to see which platform performs better. So that's the idea of the first-hand data, you collecting the data yourself through interviews, surveys, and experiments. Now let's look at the second-hand data. And the second-hand data is data that has already been collected by someone else, and you want to use it. So this is often called the secondary data. It is usually faster and cheaper to get, but it wasn't originally collected for your specific problem. So you have to analyze it carefully to make sure it fits. So anytime you look at the second-hand data, the data is a general information. So analyzing it is not as easy as collecting your own data. So an example of secondary data or second-hand data are government reports. For instance, official statistics on the economy, whether it is on medicals, whether it's on population, whether it's on census, whatever the case is, government reports, population or health. Then the second one is also about books and journals, academic research and industry-specific deep dives. So that's for the second one. And the newspapers, current events data, market trends, and public reports. So these are where you can, or the ways that you can use to collect your data. So in summary, the main difference between the first-hand data, the primary data, and the second-hand data, also known as the secondary data, is that for the first-hand data, you do most of the hard work. You go around house to house, gathering information from people, and so on and so forth. But for the second-hand data, somebody else does the hard work. Yours is to analyze yours is to analyze their output. Yeah. So the difference between the first-hand and the second-hand data will all be based on you. But I always prefer both, especially if it's your own research and you have the means and the time, go for the primary data. Because for the primary data, you specifically know what you want to know. So maybe you want to know why students are failing in their examinations. It's advisable to go for a primary first-hand data or primary data, whereby you go sit the student down and ask them certain kinds of information, detailed information, so you can know their observations, their thoughts, and their grievances. But for the second-hand data, somebody does the work for you and it's already there generally. So that is for this slide. Now let's move to the next slide. So this slide introduces a critical skill for any data analyst. That's data quality evaluation, how to evaluate your data. How can you tell whether your data is reliable or your data is dependable? Now that you know where to get your data, we've talked about where to get your data from and how to collect it. This slide teaches you how to critically audit the data before trusting it. So especially when you're going for secondary data, you have to apply this methodology. So we are going to use the craft test methodology, whereby it's normally a highly memorable framework used to check if a data source is reliable or completely useless. So anytime you have data, this is the methodology you are supposed to use to check whether your data is correct or it's not corrupt or it's not a bad data. Once your data takes all this methodology, then you realize that you are good to go. So the craft test, C stands for currency, R stands for relevance, A stands for authority, A stands for accuracy, and the P stands for what? Purpose. So I'll take my time and explain each of them. Now, currency, that's the core question. How timely is the data? Is it current with regular updates or is it outdated? Is it outdated? Sorry. So one thing you should know is that data has an expiring date. So let's say, for instance, a business is trying to analyze customers' shopping trends for today. If the business decides to use a data set from 2012, it won't work because technology and habits have completely changed. Gone were the days whereby there was nothing like delivery of food. Yeah. So if you want to, let's say, know trends about delivery of food, and you go and take 2005 data, at those times they weren't delivering food from one place to another. So that data has expired, so it won't work. So anytime you are looking for your data, make sure your data is current and they are always regular updates. If it's outdated, then the data won't help. Now the second one, relevance. How applicable is the data to our needs? One thing you have to know is that data must directly align with the problem you are solving. If, let's say, I am analyzing, let's say, a university results. If I go and take, let's say, weather data, it will be irrelevant to my goals, because how does the weather data applies to a university results? So if I want to analyze whether people did well in the university, why would I go and take a data from weather forecast or health forecast? It doesn't make sense. So you see, that data won't be relevant to my data analysis. So the idea is that whatever data that you are searching for, make sure it's aligning with the problem that you want to solve. Now the third one is authority. Who is the source of the data and what credentials do they hold? You see, one thing about as a data analyst, you must check the reputation of the creator. Is the data coming from an official or trusted entity like a government statistical service or an accredited university database? Or is it some random person who just uploaded a data on the internet? So one thing about data, make sure that you are getting it from the right source, from a trusted source, from the official source, not any random person. Then the next one is accuracy. How truthful or correct is the data from other sources? So this is about validation. Does the data contains typographical error, a lot of typographical error or formatting errors or impossible values? Maybe you have a university data and you've seen that somebody has was in a GPA in negative. I mean, there's not GPA in negative, but the person exam score, the person had 200%. It doesn't make sense. So you realize that such data will not be truthful. So every good analyst must cross-reference external data, because most external data are full with errors, with known facts to verify its precision. Then the last one I'd like to talk about is the purpose. What is this data intended for? Are there possible biases? That's one thing you should be looking for, bias. Every data set was created for a reason. That's what you should know. And you must check if the data was collected objectively or it was skewed to sell specific products, push a political agenda, or even cover up a mistake. A bank might decide to give you a false information that they are making this revenue, this sales, so that you can invest into their businesses, all in the name of profits. So there are some data that are there. It's not accurate. It contains a lot of biases to cover up their mistake or to deceive the public to sell a product. So as a data analyst, you have to check for all these things. So these are the criteria that you are supposed to use to evaluate the quality of your data. Let's move to the next slide. Okay, so you realize that in the next slide, they say real world data is usually messy and not well structured. We collect raw data in different ways and from a variety of sources, which is true, whether secondary or primary sources. And it's likely to be messy and unclean, which makes it pretty useless. One of the truth about data, especially secondary data, is that it's very, very messy. There are a lot of inconsistencies inside. So as a data analyst, one of the workload is to clean data. People are always rushing to create dashboards and do analysis. But the main work or the main engine is how to clean a data, because real world data is always messy. You will never get a real world data without any inconsistencies. So that's why you have to be very analytic. You have to be very conspicuous of your data. Look for the inconsistencies and so on and so forth. So let's look at this slide here. When you look at the unstructured data, this side, you can see that they were in a different format. It can be comma separated or tab separated values. I'll explain that later. And when they change it into a column table or into a table, you realize that there's Ken, a country, Ken. That's the inconsistencies we are talking about. There are certain data, you should know that it is not, there's a mistake somewhere. So that's one inconsistency. Then missing values. So you can see that the next column, it contains years. But you can see in this column, there's no year. That's what real value or real life scenario data is. There are some data out there, they are blank. So you have to put in the accurate data there. Then we have another one, erroneous data, whereby you can see that looking at the third column, it's in decimals, 0.2177, 0.46, whatever. But when you look at the erroneous data, instead of the 0, they've written O, the letter O. So when you're doing your analysis, it is going to be very, very difficult, especially when you want to add all of them. This is O, this is not a number. So these are erroneous data and duplicates also. So you can see Nigeria here and you can see Nigeria also here, duplicates. And you don't need duplicates. When it comes to certain kinds of data, you don't need duplicates. Like, let's say your ID cards or your ID numbers. There are never duplicates for ID numbers. So such information, when you have a data that contains ID numbers, the first thing you're supposed to do is to look for duplicates. Country also, there's no need for duplicates in countries because we don't have any country that is having the same name twice. So there are certain data out there, duplicate values are not allowed. So anytime we have a real world data, these are some of the inconsistencies that I can see or how messy the data can be. And as a data analyst, you are supposed to know all these data, understand the data, figure out all the errors, clean the data very well before you can store and analyze. So when you look at the inconsistencies, instead of, there's no country called Ken. It should be Kenya. So as a data analyst, you should be able to detect these errors. Then also you put in the value there, 2019. Then there's a duplicate that's for Nigeria. You delete it. Then you have the erroneous data. You change the O to 0. Once you do that, you realize that the data will be cleaned, like the next slide. So when you look at the next slide, the data has now been cleaned. The Ken is now called Kenya. You don't see any duplicates there. There are no erroneous data there. Now the O has been changed to 0 points. And the missing value, the year has been put there. Now this is what we mean by the data is now structured and now clean. Now when it's clean, that's how you can analyze the data. So you can see the analysis there. The percentage of seats held by women in national parliament in 2019. Rwanda was the highest. The African average was 25.31%. The lowest was Nigeria. We can only analyze this data when the data is clean. But when the data is messy or has inconsistencies inside, you won't be able to get this analysis. That's why as a data analyst, you shouldn't be in a rush to analyze data. Your goal is to clean the data very well. Once the data is very good, analysis will be great. But if the data is poor or corrupt, analysis will be very bad. Garbage in, garbage out. Okay. So let's move to the next slide. Since we'll be doing our data validation in a spreadsheet application, we'll talk about spreadsheet applications in this video where we'll be storing our data. Now, once you store your data in your spreadsheet application, there are certain things as a data analyst you're supposed to check. One is the data type. So we have a lot of data types, currency, we have dates, we have numbers, we have whole numbers, we have integers, we have decimals, a whole lot of things. So this data type checks that the data entered is in the correct type. So for instance, a column meant for number of items should only accept numerical digits, not letters or symbols. So when you have a column that should contain only numbers, You should apply a validation whereby when somebody enters a letter, it doesn't accept that kind of information. And we can do that using Microsoft Excel. Using Microsoft Excel, that's data validation feature. So that column will only accept numbers. It won't accept letters. It won't accept symbols. Anything that's not a number, that column won't accept it. So that's for the data type. Then the next one is the format check. And the format check, this ensures that data follows a specific standardized pattern. So for instance, in the date column, your format will be the day first, 26th, month, December, year, 2005. And it should remain in that format throughout the data. It should be consistent. One should be day, month, and year. Another one will be starting with year, date, and month. No, you have to make sure that they are all in this format. So that's what I mean by the format check, to check everything that they are all in the same format for consistency's sake. Then the length check also we'll talk about. It confirms that the data entered has the correct number of characters. So for instance, a phone number. So a phone number, you know, as a Ghanaian, your phone numbers contain 10 digits. If it's starting with a 0, not the +233. If it's starting with a 0, it should contain 10 digits. So you are supposed to do a validation for that column containing the phone numbers, whereby that column shouldn't accept numbers more than 10 or less than 10 digits. So that's the length check also. Then we have the consistency check. This looks for a logical relationship between two different pieces of data. So for instance, you have two columns that has delivery date and order date. The delivery date should not be a date that occurred before the order date. It's not possible because you place the order first before the delivery date comes. So always the delivery date should never be a date that occurred before the order date. These are ways to check your data. And we have the range check also. So the range check has to do with the range that verifies that a number falls within a logical or expected set of boundaries. So what do we mean? You know, as students, the lowest you can get in an exam is 0. The highest is 100. So numbers should be between 0 and 100. So if somebody gets 101 or -5, it should tell you that no, it's a mistake. So you have to create a range check in Excel, whereby that column will accept only numbers from 0 to 100. So that's for the range check. Now we'll move to the next one also. Now the presence check. This ensures that a field is not left empty. It is used for mandatory information that must be provided, such as last name. Yeah. So there are some information. What we did for the previous two slides, whereby the messy data, there was no year. There are certain informations, there shouldn't be any, it shouldn't contain blank values. It should always be what? Be filled. That's why when you're filling certain forms, you realize that certain forms are there, certain fields are compulsory to fill. They will not accept any empty values. These are all part of this presence check, that you have to make sure that such field is always full with information. Okay, so that is it for the lookup validation. Now let's go to the next slide. So the next slide, get started with what you have. So this is the cycle. You are supposed to gather enough data to get you started. So as a data analyst, make sure you have enough data. The data shouldn't be too small and shouldn't be too much. Yeah. And you shouldn't have a lot of data to begin analysis. And the data shouldn't also be scanty. It should be reasonable or should be within a definite range based on your discretion though. So once you get enough data, then you launch your data analysis project. What is your goal? What are your insights? What do you want to draw from the data? What is your, what's the name? What is your problem and what solutions do you want to derive from the data? So once you get enough data, this is your plan now. You have to launch your data analysis project. Look for insights, look for solutions to your problems. Then after that, you identify gaps and additional data that you need. I said it earlier that in real-time data, most of the data are full of inconsistencies. they are full of duplicates. You also have some erroneous data inside. And you even have some blanks whereby information is meant to be in such blanks. So when you get to such things like that, you have to identify the gaps yourself. So you have to be very analytical and observant. You have to identify those gaps yourself and put in the additional data that you need. So later on in the course, I'll teach you how to put in certain data. You don't have to get up. Let's say you want sales and you realize that one column there was no sales inside. What are you going to do? Are you just going to put any number there, or you are going to put a specific data there? I will show you that as we continue with this data analysis project. But for now, this is the cycle. Gather enough data to get you started. Launch your data analysis project. Make sure you identify gaps and additional data that you need to make your data complete. That's where the data cleaning comes inside. And as you can see there also, they said data gathering is not a one-time activity, but a continuous cycle. So anytime you are gathering data, you don't gather it once. As time goes on, you should also be searching for data. You should also be updating the data. That's one thing as a data analyst. So data analyst, our job is not one. It's a cycle. We keep doing it until it becomes part of us life. So that's what is expected as a data analyst. It's not a one-time activity, but a continuous cycle. So now let's move to the next slide. Introduction with spreadsheet. So what is a spreadsheet? So a spreadsheet is a file used to organize, store, and analyze data in a table format made up of rows and columns. So in our previous slides, I remember that I said once we are done collecting data, we are supposed to manage and store data. So where are we going to store the data? So in this course, we are going to store the data in a spreadsheet application. There are so many ways whereby we can store data. We are going to use spreadsheet applications to store our data. And these are the three basic spreadsheet applications. And one feature of a spreadsheet application is that it has rows and columns. So once it has rows and columns and it's used for statistical analysis or mathematical analysis, then we call it a spreadsheet. So these are the examples of spreadsheets. We have the Microsoft Excel. I'll show you the interface. We have the Google Sheet also. I'll show you the interface. And we have the LibreOffice also. So these are the three basic spreadsheet applications that we have. But in this course, we are going to analyze using Microsoft Excel, not Google Sheet, not LibreOffice. I'm going to show you how their interface looks like. And they have one thing in common. Rows and columns labeled alphabetically and in a number form. So let me show you how the Microsoft Excel interface is. So you could see this is the Microsoft Excel interface, how it looks like. You can see the columns there. You can also see the rows. The columns are in alphabet and the rows are in numbers, and these are the tabs. So this is just a general knowledge about Microsoft Excel. In our next model, I will explain the anatomy of Microsoft Excel. So this is how the Excel looks like, with rows and columns, and these rectangular boxes are called cells. So every spreadsheet application has rows, it has columns, and it has cells, with a formula bar also there. So these are some features of a spreadsheet application. So this is an Excel application. Now, if you want to use Google Sheets also, Google Sheet, you have to use the internet though, even though you can use some offline. So I come here, I search for Google, or you see this side, when you click on it, you see all the Google applications. So when I click on it, I'll look for Sheets. So this is Sheets. So I click on the sheet. And once I click on the sheet, I click on blank sheet or blank spreadsheet. So you could see that between the Google Sheet, so this is the interface of a Google Sheet. So there are some similarities between the Google Sheets. You can see your rows also in numbers. You can see your columns also in alphabet. You can see the rectangular boxes, also known as the cells, and these are their tabs though. So realize that the Microsoft Excel and the Google Sheet have similar features. So this is how you can access your Google Sheet. You can also analyze with Google Sheets, but I'll be teaching you using Microsoft Excel. Then let's look at the LibreOffice. So these are the LibreOffice is. So you can see at the top there, very similar to Microsoft Excel, but that's LibreOffice. So you could see that it also has columns in alphabetical order. It also has rows in numbers, and this is also the formula bar also, and these are the tabs. So these are the LibreOffice looks like. It looks like Microsoft Excel, but they have the same features, not the same, but similar features. So we have I've shown you the Microsoft Excel interface. I've also shown you the Google Sheet interface, and this is the LibreOffice interface. So mostly Ghanaians, we either use the Microsoft Excel and the Google Sheet. Yeah. Most people don't use the LibreOffice in Ghana. Mostly it's either Microsoft Excel or Google Sheet. So these are the three main spreadsheet applications that we'll be using for data analysis. But in this course, we'll be focusing solely on Microsoft Excel. Okay, so let's move back to our slide. So we're moving to the next slide. So on the next slide, these are some spreadsheet terminologies. So what are some of the key things you're supposed to know on spreadsheet applications? I'm going to take my time and explain them one by one so we get the idea of or the interface of a spreadsheet application. But I'm going to explain it using Microsoft Excel. So the first one that we have here is the cell. So the cell is a single box in a grid for one piece of data. So when I go to my Excel, this is what I mean by a cell, the rectangular. You can enter data inside. You can enter data inside. So you see, this is what I mean by a cell. So anytime you hear cells, it's just the intersection of rows and columns. So this rectangular data or this rectangular box is what we mean by what? The cell. And we can enter data inside, whether numbers, whether text, whether dates, whatever the case is, we can enter inside each cell. So this is what we mean by a cell. Then let's move to the next one. The next one is the cell reference, a unique address of a cell. So you realize that each cell has an address. So what's the name of this address? This cell address is Jane9. You can see it at this side. You get it? So how Jane, where Jane and 9 meet, where they intersect, that's the name of the cell. So this one will give you, this one is E8. You can see it at the top there. If I want to go to A5, I can also search at the top there and just write A5. And it moves me towards A5. So these are the cell reference. So each rectangular cell has a reference or has a name. And you see it always here. This is I11. This is FE8. So you can see that the E has been bolded and the 8 has also been bolded. Where they meet is their intersection. So this is what I mean by the cell reference. Then the next one, we move to columns, a vertical line of cells identified by letters, and row, a horizontal line of cells identified by what? Numbers. So all the three spreadsheet applications I showed you, they all have the same thing. Columns is this, so this is column A, this is column B, this is column C, and they're all identified by what? Letters. Take note of that. I think Excel has 16,000 plus columns. You can imagine 16,000 plus columns. So, and the columns are labeled alphabetically. Then the rows are also labeled to row 1, row 2, row 3, row 4. And Excel also has, I think, 1 million plus rows. Yes. I don't know the exact figure, about 1,042,000 or so plus rows. So you can realize that Excel can contain a lot of data. I can imagine 1 million rows here. So these are the rows. Rows are the horizontal cells and columns are the vertical ones. Where they meet, the intersection is what we mean by the cell. Then we move to the next one. has to do with a range. So a range is a selected group of two or more cells. So anytime we talk about a range, two or more cells. So let's imagine I insert data here. Yeah. So what is a range? When I highlight or select these two or more cells, this will mean by a range. So a range is when you highlight two or more cells. If it's just one, it's just called a cell. But when you highlight this and this is a range. When you highlight this and this is also what? A range. So this is from E7 to E9. That is the range. So starting from E7 to what? To E9. So this will mean by a range, highlighting two or more cells together. Then the next one has to do with formula. So a formula is an equation used to calculate and return data. So there's a difference between a formula and a function. And a function is a built-in, ready-to-use shortcut for complex calculations. So I'll show you the difference between a formula and a function. And the argument also. So the argument is also a specific data or cell range you plug into a function so that it can do its job. So I'm going to explain the formula, the function, and the argument at a go. So now let's imagine I have 78 here. I have 45 here. 33 here. And I want to add these three numbers. If I'm using a formula, always, anytime you want to do a calculation in Excel, you begin with an equal to sign. So if I want to add these numbers, I can use the cell references. So I'll do this one. I'm using the formula now. So J11 plus J12 plus J13. This will mean by a formula, whereby if I want to add numbers, I put in my own formula with the basic operations inside. So I'm using the cell references. So what is in J11? 78. What is in J12? 45. What is in J13? 33. So I add it and I get what? My 156. That is a formula. What about a function? A function, Excel has built-in functions that makes our work so easy. So I'm going to also add these numbers, but I'm not going to use a formula now. I'm going to use a built-in function. And anytime you want to use a built-in function, you also begin with what? An equal to sign. So since I want to add the numbers, Excel has an inbuilt function called sum. You can see the sum. You press the tab key. Once you press the tab key, you see number 1 here, right? You see it's bolded. You see number 2. Those are the arguments. So each function has a what? An argument. So I can select the range like this. So I'm telling Excel to sum numbers from J11 to J13. And the range, you see a colon there. So J11 to J13 is also a way. So you see I'm adding using what? A function. Then I press enter. I get the same answer. But this one I added using what? A formula. But for this one I had to use the inbuilt function called sum to add what? The number. So that's the difference between a formula and a function. Excel has almost more than 400 functions and they are still updated. So when I press sum, you can see a lot of functions there. Substitute, subtotal, sum. If these are all functions that Excel use to make our work easier. And each function has their argument also. So look at the sum if, look at the argument. The argument one, we have the range, we have the criteria, we have the sum range also. So these are the arguments for each function. So each function has an argument, and you have to understand the argument. Okay. Then let's move to the next one. We have the worksheet and the workbook. So a worksheet is a single sheet within your spreadsheet tab. And the workbook is the entire spreadsheet file, which can hold multiple worksheets. So when you look at this data, this is a sheet, like an exercise book. We have one sheet. So we have a worksheet and we have a workbook. Now the workbook is the Excel file itself. And what I'm working on is a sheet. That's why I see sheet 1 here. So this is a sheet. If I want to add another sheet, I can press the tab key and I add, it gets sheet 2. If I want more, I'll press the plus key. If I want another one, I just press. So you see, I have 4 sheets. So this is sheet 1 that has the data inside. This is sheet 2. This is sheet 3. This is sheet 4. And they are all in the in the Microsoft Excel application. So the name of the application now is book 1. So that's the workbook. But the worksheets are the sheets within the book. So just like at the analogy of the exercise book, we have an exercise book which is one, but inside the exercise book we have 40 sheets inside. Same way applies to the what? The Microsoft Excel. Each spreadsheet application has sheets inside. It can be 10, 20,000 sheets. But the workbook is the file itself. And the sheets are within what? The file. So you should know the difference between a workbook and a worksheet. So I think that is it for the spreadsheet what? Terminologies. Okay, so we move to the next slide. So the next slide, we'll be talking about text file format. And what are text file format? We can store our data in a plain text. Yeah. So, and the plain text is, so anytime we hear about text file format, this is when our information, our data are stored in plain text files. And it's in the form of a table. But you won't see the table drawn in the, what's the name? In the text file. But what you see is a separator. And each separator represents what? The columns. So we have two main types of the text file format. We have the comma separated value and the tab separated value. So you could see the two most common used text file formats in spreadsheets are comma separated value, that's the CSV, and the tab separated value. Now the most common delimiter for a CSV file is a comma. So I will show you how such files look like. So you realize that a company can have bulk data on a text file format, and it's easy to convert it into Microsoft Excel or any other spreadsheet. But one thing about, as you see the word comma separated, that means that the data is separated with comma. But one thing about CSV files is that it can also be separated with semicolon or a tab or even a space. Yeah. So anytime you see CSV, it doesn't necessarily mean that it was all the data are separated with columns or comma. Some might be separated with semicolon, some might be separated with tab or even a pipe. Do you get it? So, but for the tab separated value, they are always separated with what? With a tab. So I'm going to show you the difference between the comma separated value, the tab separated value. But take note of this. Anytime they talk about the comma separated value, it's not always that it's separated by a comma. There are always, it can be a semicolon, or it can even be even a tab or a space or a pipe. So I'm going to show you the difference. Now you can see this is a comma separated value. So you will see the country, comma. So as I said earlier, each comma represents a column. So this will be the first column for country. This will be the second column for year. And the third one is what the proportion of seats held by women in national parliament. So you should tell that this data has 3 columns, but the columns are represented by a separator known as the comma. So when you look at the data carefully, you realize that they are all separated by a comma. So this is what I mean by the CSV file. Your data is stored in plain text with commas separating each value, and the commas represent a column. We'll convert it into Microsoft Excel for you to understand. Then this is also a CSV file. But I realize that the CSV file, you don't see a comma, rather see a semicolon. You get it? That's why I said that for CSV files, you can see semicolons, you can even see a colon or even a tab. So all the delimiter here is the semicolon. Even though it's a CSV file or a comma separated value or file, you realize that it's not separated with commas, but rather semicolon. And there's also another situation whereby you can get a CSV file, but there are multiple delimiters inside or separators inside. So look at this file, you realize that there's a comma here, and there's also a semicolon. One file, but has 2 separators, comma and semicolon. How do we go by it also? Then this is the tab. The tab also is separated by tab. When you press the tab key on your keyboard, you see the space that comes in between it. That's what I mean by the tab key. So the information are separated with with tabs. And each tab represents the column. So you are going to convert, this is a text file. I'm going to convert it into Microsoft Excel. So let's do that right away. So I have my file here. So you can see this. And Excel, when it's comma separated value, they automatically, when you open a file using Microsoft Excel, Excel will automatically split it in columns for you. If it's separated by by comma. But if it's separated by other delimiter, you have to do it yourself. So since this one is separated by comma, you can see Microsoft Excel comma separated value file. So this is a CSV file. So I'm going to open it right now. Double click. And you realize that the information has already been separated for you. In what? In columns for you. So it's because Excel recognizes this file as comma separated value. So this is so easy for you. When it's a comma separated value, Excel will automatically split it in columns for you. Now, let's look at the next one. This one rather. This one, even though it's a CSV, but it's separated with what? A semicolon. So you see how the data is. So you see this data. All this information are in column A. Take note of that. Because when I move the cell to column B, you don't see anything at the formula bar. But when I move it to column A, you realize that they're all in one column. So I can just double click here so that you see it clearly now. That all the information are being contained in what? In just one column, which it shouldn't be so. So even though it's a CSV file, but it's separated with semicolon, that's why Excel didn't split it for you. So you have to split it yourself. So what do? I highlight the column, come to data, then you go to text to columns. You see delimited, right? You move to next. You see, so you choose a delimiter. It's separated by what? Semicolon. So I'll select this one and uncheck the tab. So you can see how our information, this is the preview, how the information will be like. When I select comma, you realize that it will give me semicolon because it's not separated with a comma. So I select the delimiter, that's the semicolon. I press next. Then I think I press finish. Then you are good to go. You realize that now your information has been separated in what? In the right columns, 3 columns. So that's how to separate file. But if it's separated by comma, Excel will automatically do it for you. But if it's any other value, you have to do it yourself. Then let's move to the last one, whereby you see 2 or more delimiters, like this one. It has comma and it has, what's the name? Is it semicolon? So you see this one has a comma and this one has a semicolon. But you see Excel has automatically split the comma for you. So you have to do the semicolon yourself. So what do? I'll highlight this data. Then I'll press data, go to text to columns, go to next. The delimiter is semicolon. You press next, press finish, and you are good to go. Then your information is split into what? Into columns. So this is what I mean by text files. And the main reason why companies use text files is because, as time goes on, you don't know, there's upgrading softwares. So if your data is always in a Microsoft Excel or a Google Sheet and they upgrade their software, maybe a time will come, it won't be compatible again. So the best thing is that companies store chunk of their data in a text file format. Once it's in a text file format, you just convert it into Microsoft Excel, then you do the splitting yourself if the file doesn't do it for you. Yeah. And if it's in Microsoft Excel also, you can convert it back to a text value or a text file. So you can go to file, come to save as, select where you want to save. Maybe I want to save on the desktop. Then you see, you can choose here, save as type. You can choose the comma separated value, CSV, or even, I think you have the CSV, different types. You also have the TSV also there, or even PDF. Then we are good to go. So that is it for text files. We are back to our slide. Let's move to the next one. We are almost done here. So this is a spreadsheet file format. Anytime you save a spreadsheet application, you realize that it's in a format. The current format is XLSX. That is the current format for Microsoft Excel. But if you are if you include macros, we'll talk about macros later on. When you include macros, you realize that to be XLSM. Standing for what? The macros that you use. Macros has to do with automations, things that you do repeatedly. You can let Excel do it automatically for you. That's for macros. So if it's in XLSX, that's a normal Excel file. But if it's M, it's macro enabled. Then we have the text file format here. So a text file is a digital file. So this is the textbook definition. It's a digital file that contains plain text only. So the text file format only stores text strings without any additional styling or formatting information. So why should we use text files? As they said earlier, spreadsheet files are not suitable for storing data long term, which is true because of the updates that will be coming in the near future. They are software specific and may become obsolete and unreadable with subsequent spreadsheet software upgrades. So as they are upgrading the software, a time will come, it won't be feasible for that particular software. Yeah. So text files are more ideal for sharing and preserving original raw data. So if you're a company and you have chunk of data, it's advisable to store it in a text file format, whether comma separated, tab separated, whatever the case is, let it be in a text file format. And it's simple and lightweight. Excel, the more you store data inside, the more it becomes very heavy. But when it's in a text file format, it's easy to go. So one advantage is that it's simple and lightweight. They do not store any other extra information, and it's easily readable even in the future. They do not require special word software. Every software can read a text file word format. And you can see each line represents a row and is separated from the next using a line break. So the line breaks are the commas and the tab and the pipe and so on. And each value in a row is separated from the other using a delimiter character, which eventually forms what? Columns. So as I explained earlier, once there's a column, that means there's a comma or any delimiter, there's a new what? Column. Then we'll move to the last slide. What's a delimiter? So these are the various delimiters that you'll be getting in the text file format. So a delimiter is one or more characters that are used to split plain text into separate data units. So these are the common delimiters that you will see there. You will see the comma, you will see the semicolon, you will see the tab, you see the space, you see the pipe. So these are the delimiters that you will see in Microsoft Word in a text file format. So why use delimiters? They organize plain text data into rows and what? Columns. That's the essence. Once I write comma, school, what's the name? Infantile school, comma. These are all separating the data into rows and what? Columns. So we use the delimiter to separate the data into rows and what? Columns. They specify the exact location where each data unit within a text string starts and ends. We don't need fixed length within the text to be able to split it. And by splitting the data, we can perform certain operations on it, such as sorting, filtering, and so on and so forth. So this is the textbook definition of delimiters. I hope you enjoyed our first model. So this is the end of model 1 of our data and analysis course. In the next video, we'll be talking about introduction to using data. So we'll talk about the types of data. We'll talk about selecting data in sheets, data visibility, how we introduce you to formulas and where to use them, row calculations, column calculations. And I think that's what will be for the end of module 2. So don't forget to like, don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel, don't forget to share, and don't forget to give me any thumbs up or any comments. Stay tuned for the next, and the last thing, don't forget to put me on post notifications. So once I upload the next model, you'll be notified first. Thank you for your time, and God richly bless you.